Retro.
Hey, this is Catherine Tabor, Senator Padme Amidala from Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Stay on the light side.
Welcome back to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are very honored to have back one of our favorite guests, Alan Voivod. You know him as the host of Star Wars 7x7, and he is the author of Hyperspacing Hope. Alan, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be back with you guys.
Fantastic. So we just had Alan on a week ago to discuss The Force Awakens, and we took advantage of that time to have him back on to discuss the book that he wrote around Star Wars called Hyperspacing Hope. And we're going to get to that in just a second. But before we do, Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found on social media.
All right. We can be found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we're now broadcasting to the galaxy. So, Alan, I know between our two podcasts that you have a broader set of listeners that also, a subset of which listens to our show. And so a lot of people in this are going to know you from Star Wars 7x7. You did that show for 10 years and put out how many episodes? It was in thousands there.
Over 3,700.
Oof. Okay. Mad props to you. That is crazy. That is serious.
It's a certain kind of insanity, I guess.
Yeah. I've always been impressed by that number and your daily commitment to doing the show with very little of banking in advance and things to account for what was going on in life. But you were always very current on your podcast. I know it's a bit of a hiatus right now, but it was for a very good reason, because you wrote this book, Hyperspacing Hope, subtitled What the Star Wars Movies Reveal to Us About the Nature of Hope. And so I know how this book came to be from having listened to you talk about it on your podcast and conversations I've had with you. And I know Jay knows this as well, and you state so in the book. But for our listeners at home that may not be familiar, can you describe the history and genesis of this product here that you've created?
So I'll do it as succinctly as I possibly can. Back in 2019, I was nominated to give a talk for TEDx, which is the locally. There are hundreds of these organizations all around the world. They're locally organized and take the idea of TED Talks and do them at a local level. And somebody on the local nominating committee put my name for it as somebody who might deliver a talk. And so I had no idea what I was going to do. And my wife said to me, when you think about Star Wars, like, what is it about Star Wars? What is the most important thing? And I had said hope and found family. Like, those are the two things that, jumped out at me about Star Wars. And so I just reread the pitch that I did initially for them, because you have to fill out their nomination form and say, what is your idea worth spreading? And it was the, thought of, what did the Star Wars movies tell us about the nature of hope? And it ultimately became a very personal talk. And I was not expecting that to be where it went. One of the things that they do is that they assign you a speaker coach. So they have a number of people who volunteer with the organization and say, hey, we're going to help you craft a talk that will be something you'll be proud of when you get to deliver it on stage. And I ended up talking about my personal life growing up in Los Angeles as a child of divorce with a single mother and being a latchkey kid, and occasionally experiencing what is now called food insecurity, but just kind of being hungry between meals as a teenager, and how lonely I was a lot of times, but how much comfort Star Wars movies gave me, and how that kind of helped me have hope for my own future, and ultimately crafted it into a talk in November of 2019, and was so convinced that, wow, maybe I've really stumbled upon an interesting idea around hope and Star Wars, but I realized that I'd only kind of scratched the surface about it. And so I did a number of podcast episodes where I, looked at how the word hope was used in each of the Star Wars movies. And I did episodes about the ideas about hope and its different aspects and how they were expressed. And with the idea that eventually I wanted to do something with this, but because of the being on the train of creating episodes on a daily basis, it was really hard to envision how I could possibly get everything together into one idea, one book, while still doing that. So I went on hiatus as of late July, I think it was the 28th of 2024, and set about going through the transcripts. And I gave sort of a part 2 talk on hope to a retreat in New Hampshire, and a part 3 talk on hope to another retreat in Connecticut, and realized that not only was this about Star Wars, but it also seemed like it was a message that people needed to hear about. And maybe Star Wars was the way in for me, but it would be, the way out and through for other people who weren't necessarily Star Wars fans, but who were interested in the idea of hope. And so a lot of time sitting with the material, a lot of rewatching the movies, and a lot of realizing, how did I write anything about The Empire Strikes Back and I didn't write anything about Leia and her experience of hope on the first 2 drafts, and thinking, this is crazy, what was I thinking? And realizing that the mine, the vein of hope in these movies runs so deep and touches so many people in so many different ways, that it sort of became a bigger and bigger project. And I finally feel like I got my hands wrapped around it in the way that I wanted to with Hyperspacing Hope. And then, of course, they had to announce that the Mandalorian and Grogu movie would come out in May. And so I'm like, there's going to have to be a second edition that talks about that movie, I guess.
Yeah.
Or do I wait for Starfighter to come out too? Like, what do I do with this? But I had hit publish, and thinking that Amazon was going to take 24 to 72 hours. I hit publish on it in their system on December 31st in the afternoon, thought like I was going to have a January 1st, 2026 publication date, and not quite. Like, they actually approved it almost immediately. It was like,
Wow.
ridiculous. Within 6 hours, like I was at a New Year's Eve party and I got the notification that it had already been approved.
Wow.
And it
Oh,
had
Mm.
it had a publication date of December 31st. I was like, oh, I wanted it in January, but I also it had been so long that I was like, I have to get it out into the world. So it was one of those weird little things. Like, it just straddles the line. It was published 12:45 a.m. on the East Coast, but 9:45 in Amazon's purview on the West Coast. So it just
Wow.
is just right on that border.
I love that
What a
you know
great-
the exact time on that. That is so
Yeah.
cool. That is congratulations, because I know how hard you worked on this, from having followed you and your development on that. That's really cool. And
Mhm.
to see that type of labor of love come to fruition, that's pretty cool.
And Dennis, I
Yes.
have to thank you too for also reading an early draft of the book and giving me your feedback and your observations and insights, because that was also very helpful too. And I'm extremely grateful for that. So thank you.
That was my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yes.
Okay.
I saw your name in the book, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, well,
Mhm.
I was
Pretty
honored
cool.
to be there. So thank you so
Yeah.
much.
And what a way to ring in the new year. And a true labor of love. You took the words right out of my mouth, Dennis, for sure. And that whole idea, I mean, obviously Star Wars is hope. And that is, you can't go through a movie without sensing that hope, I feel like. And so extracting it in that way and putting it on the page, even though, I'm sure, like you said, oh darn, I have to go back and rewatch the movies again, kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
Geez,
Oh, twist my
hmm.
arm, please.
Harsh
Oh,
research, right? But I have to ask too, and you did such a great job. Every chapter focuses on hope in its own way, and you did a really great job of pulling out, as you mentioned, different characters that might embody the sense of hope, or how they interpret hope, or how hope is found in that particular movie. But were there any movies, or any instances where you kind of found it a little difficult to extract the message of hope, or where you really had to kind of dig a little deep, or was it pretty laid out? How do you feel about that?
I'll say the prequel movies as a whole, I felt like hope was a little bit harder to find as it went on, because everything about those movies is, a downward slope toward, the fall of the Republic. And so that one, for Attack of the Clones, I think I spent, a lot of time kind of switching around the idea and saying, hope isn't just for heroes. Like, the villains have hopes, but then that sort of gave me the way into the idea of thinking of ambition as sort of a dark mirror of hope. So I'd say the prequels were a little bit difficult, and then Solo was a little bit difficult as well. And that was the one where I came up with the idea of there's a I think it's a Raymond Carver short story. It's called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, or something. I think that's the title of it. And in my head, I was like, what do we talk about when we talk about luck? And what we're really talking about is hope. And so I realized, I had the realization, oh, like, luck is how these people can talk about hope in a way that isn't too earnest, isn't too vulnerable, isn't too, safe, basically. Like, they can talk about luck because it gives them that cool and that swagger and whatnot, but that's what they're really talking about underneath it all.
Mhm, mhm. One of the things I picked up on over the course of the book was that, especially when it gets to Conversations, Revenge of the Sith, is that you talk about hope versus ambition.
Mm,
And you mentioned that, that certain characters are speaking of hope as a way to change the future, to do a better good. And then ambition, from the perspective of Anakin Skywalker, is about power and attaining things and stuff like that.
mhm.
Did you ever consider, and maybe I'm just students not to pick this up, but that the Force in Star Wars is a stand-in for hope and ambition, depending on who's using it, which side of the Force they're on? Because I kind of felt like that's like where you were going a little bit on that. But is that am I on the right track there, or what did you think?
Absolutely, and you're right, I did not make that really explicit, basically, but I do think you're correct that the light side of the Force does line up. Maybe I do a little bit here and there, but the light side of the Force definitely lines up more with hope, and the dark side of the Force lines up more with ambition, for sure. So yeah, because of the the selfless versus the selfish nature of the light side and the dark side, and hope, I would say, is a very other centered thing. At best, its selfishness could be described as the idea of putting the oxygen mask on yourself first before
Mhm.
you help other people. So there's certainly an element of, like, yeah, you got to be able to take care of yourself in order to take care of other people. But ultimately, the focus is on, how can I be of service? What can I do to see things be better, not just for me, but for the world around me, which also helps me as well. Whereas with the dark side of the Force, it is very much about one's personal experience to the exclusion of the rest of the galaxy, or at least one's advantage for self, as opposed to the advantages that the rest of the galaxy can feel. Like, you think about Palpatine, he does not care about the well-being of the rest of the galaxy, and he might put a little lip service to it by saying that he's trying to bring order and peace and justice, but the way he wants to do it is not a very friendly one, to say the least. So yeah, that advantageousness is really more focused about him and his own power, than it is about the rest of the galaxy.
Yeah. No, to be clear, I really enjoyed that description that you made in the book, which was that the expression of hope, which, you had Leia, who is, and Luke and Han to a degree, that are looking to, make a change, to do something societal. Whereas Anakin, especially in those final moments with the Revenge of the Sith,
Mhm.
it is all about ambition, making the galaxy the way that they want it to be and the like. And frankly, I had never heard it described that way before. And so it really stood out to me in that regard,
Mm.
which is, one of those things which is, it kind of gets into, those lines of attachment as well, which is, what is the version of attachment? The Jedi sometimes talk about you have to be willing to connect, but how is that different than attachment? And I think talking about it and the idea of
Mhm.
hope versus ambition was very enlightening when I read the book.
Oh, thank you.
Indeed.
There's so many different ways that you talk about hope being interpreted by different characters. And one of my personal favorite quotes, I actually have this on a sign on my wall. I have to take a picture and send it to you. Hope is
Yeah.
like the sun. If
Mhm.
you only believe in it when you see it, you'll never make it through the night. And
Mhm.
that is my personal favorite quote about hope. So, and that was something that they were choosing in the moment. And it was something that Poe had to really kind of be sort of convinced of in some ways. And at first it was almost like, oh yeah, this is something that Leia always said, yeah, and kind of finishing the whole thing. But then he truly embodied it later. So do you think that in general is in Star Wars, is hope something that's earned through struggle, or is it something that characters choose under circumstance or regardless of circumstance, or is it a little bit of both? How do you feel?
I do feel like it is a combination of nature and nurture, as it were. I do think that hope is something that, you know, in our just in our general nature, I think there is some inclination to be more hopeful or, or less hopeful. But I also think it's something that can be learned through experience. And I do think that upbringing and, what you're exposed to as a kid and growing up can skew things one way or the other. But in some of the research for this, I had come across uh, um, I'm not going to remember her name, unfortunately, and I'll have to find it for you. But it is a nun who was talking about the prison system, and uh, I'm botching the delivery of it. But one of the things that she talked about is the idea of hope as a discipline, as something that isn't just something that you have, but it's something that you actively have to work on. You have to continue to keep your focus on something positive, on looking for the opportunities for better results, looking for your your power in situations and figuring out what you can do to bring yourself or bring the people around you closer to hopeful outcomes in even the darkest of situations. Or if it seems like there is nothing that you can do, then to figure out how to reframe, to find places where you can keep your hope lit. And she was talking about this under like the ideas of like just the crushing hopelessness of the prison system, and how it isn't necessarily meant to keep people's hope alive. In fact, it's actually kind of quite the opposite. And how do you reform that, even as somebody from the outside? And you have to have this as a mental attitude, just like you would exercise to, keep yourself in physical shape. You would want to, continue to maintain the discipline of hope as something for your own mental health and well-being shape, basically.
Yeah, one of my favorite things when I used to teach personal wellness was the idea of the circles of control. What
Mm,
can you control? What is 100% in your control? What can you influence? And what is truly out of your control? And so I
mhm.
think hope is one of those things that you is definitely something that you can influence based on how you look at your things that you do control in everyday life. So as you said, it's a conscious kind of a discipline that needs to be had. And some of the characters in Star Wars do that very well, and others even completely reject it. And you talk about Kylo Ren as rejecting the legacy of hope almost at the very beginning.
Yeah. And I have the name, and in the nun thing, I'm conflating something. Mariam Kaba, Kaba, who's organizer, educator, curator, where her work focuses on ending violence, dismantling the prison industrial complex, and transformative justice. So I don't know why I'm carrying the nun thing in my head, but that's where it was coming from. Dismantling the carceral state.
Huh. Okay.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, indeed. Which is going to make this question feel very light by comparison. But I was going to start off by asking you, which character do you think best personifies or expresses the themes of hope in Star Wars? I kind of have a feeling I know what that answer is going to be, so maybe pick the second best. But on the flip side of that, uh, is there a character that you were surprised to find had something to say about hope when you were doing the research for this book?
So, and we were talking about, the podcast itself. Way back in the early days, I did an episode where I crowned the insult king and queen of Star Wars, and I had said that C-3PO was the insult king, and Leia was the insult queen of Star Wars. And it's funny that I say that also in light of the fact that I think Leia is the hope queen of Star Wars, and I think Han is kind of the hope king of Star Wars, which is a very unexpected thing. Like, just nobody in Star Wars is so bought into the idea of hope, like, and so determined to make their reality, make their imaginings a reality than Han is. And so I think the thing that surprised me the most from a character perspective was talking about Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones. And he was sort of the way into me thinking about how villains have hope of a sort, but but it looks different, basically. And so in his whole speech, and I had to trim this down in the book. I had a much longer dissection of his conversation with Obi-Wan Kenobi in Attack of the Clones when they're on Geonosis, and he has Obi-Wan like in that prison thing hanging there. He's like, what if I told you there was this going on? And just how he mixes the truth and the lies all into one just amazingly beautiful story that just makes so much utter and complete sense, and so much of it is true, and so much of it is manipulated. But the idea that he presents a hopeful outcome to Obi-Wan, like, join me and we can destroy the Sith, like, that's at the heart of the rotting core of the Republic, that is right there. And I believe him. Like, after watching that movie over and over again for this, I believe him. Like, I believe that he wanted to get rid of Dooku. Now, of course, he wanted to get rid of Sidious. He probably wanted to take Sidious's place, and probably wanted to kill Obi-Wan for that matter too. But like, I believed him so hard and was stunned. Like, that was something that we've talked about this before on many of the podcasts and all the movie segments that we've done together, about how when you watch these movies, there's just always something new that you find. And I think that was one of the biggest things was in the work for this book, finding the actual earnestness in Count Dooku's entreaty to Obi-Wan, like, help me defeat this Sith. And like, this is a bad guy, but he's actually deadly serious. Like, I believe if Obi-Wan had said, you know what, I'll do it, he would have freed him, and they would have done it. Like, I don't think Dooku would have turned on Obi-Wan until, the job was done, or the job was like almost done, and like, nah, I just need you out of the way so I can finish it, like that caught me off guard. I was not expecting to have that kind of interaction with hope with Count Dooku, and yet there it was.
No, I think that's a great one. And, and as you were writing the book too, I'm sure you had a lot of different kind of, epiphanies about different things. And, oh, wow, gosh, I never really thought about it that way. And as you were rewatching all of the movies and you were really analyzing some of these things, did you ever think to yourself, if I could add one new line into any of the Star Wars films, where would it be? Like, oh gosh, this was a missed opportunity. They could have put something about hope right here, or this character could have said this about hope. Have you ever thought of that?
I have not, but what you did just make me think about, and it actually relates to the sign that you were just talking about, the exchange between Vice Admiral Holdo and Poe Dameron around, the trust and the hope and the faith and belief that, hey, something is happening. Like, I have wanted a line of dialogue there around that, just like somehow tell Poe that they were working on an exhaust system. There's a I believe it's the novel Cobalt Squadron, which was one of those Journey to the Last Jedi books, and you learn about Paige and Rose Tico, and that is where they talk about how Rose invented the idea of the baffling of the engines that applies to all of those little shuttle pods that they launch, which are flying away to Crate and are not going to get picked up on the sensors of the First Order ships until, of course, DJ, that rascal, overhears everything and rats out the resistance to the First Order. But like something about just wanting Poe to hear like just at least a little something that could move it from blind faith to hope, just one little element where he could be on board. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, characters that can't be perfect, and they have to have the imperfections so you can create the drama and the conflict and the whatnot. So I understand why it had to go down the way it went down, but I think that's the one where, as I was writing the book, where I was like, I really wish that she had given him one thing, or that he could have discovered, on his own, one thing that might have given him pause and thought, okay, that, changes things. Now I might have a little hope for that. And even with him waking up on the shuttle and realizing that they were all flying away, nobody said to him, hey, we're baffled. Like, what? Rose had this whole plan. Like, oh my gosh, like not even that realization. So like even a line there, I would have loved. But yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dennis, as we're talking about this, do you have any, hope wish list kind of quotes that you can think of where you would have inserted? I thought about this, so I had the luxury of thinking about it, but I want to hear if you have any ideas.
I don't know, but I just want to comment on not to avoid your question, Jay, but what you were just talking about, Alan, though, when I read that in your book and the thing, I was like, that's something that I didn't realize it always bugged me until you put words to it in that moment, which was Poe was trying to do his best for the Resistance in that matter. And he had, I think, a different issue at the beginning of the movie than that issue that he had with Vice Admiral Holdo, which is at the beginning of the movie, he just wasn't doing what Leia told him to do. And in the middle of the movie, he would have been willing to do whatever anyone told him if they would just tell him what it was that they were trying to do in this situation. And he lost hope there, which is, it was like, here we are being pursued by the First Order, and they're all cannons blazing, and we've got multiple Star Destroyers behind us, and all we're doing is flying away at seemingly very slow speed. What is the plan here? And that's what she shouts. It's just like, I can't remember exactly what he says, but tell us what's going on. And she won't do it, and it comes off as stubbornness in that moment here. And Vice Admiral Holdo is smarter than that. And so I'm with you, Alan. It's just when I read that in the book, it's like, that is exactly what we needed in that moment, was for her to give him some other reason to believe, some other reason to hope that things were going to work out. And so that was very well put. Honestly, Jay, I don't have a good answer to your question about that though, but that was a good question.
Well, like I said, I had the luxury of thinking about it, but I will say that I echo what Dennis just said too. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about your book, Alan, is that we've seen these movies how many times? I mean, countless number of times. And we have analyzed
The Force
them
Awakens
from
11 times in theaters, I think, if that's right.
Yes, good memory.
That's just in theaters. That's not even
Just
counting
the
home.
theaters. Yeah, exactly. But the thing of it is that we have analyzed these movies from every angle possible, and yet you've given fans and readers of your book, and I really encourage everybody to pick it up, to really look at things from a different perspective yet once again. And as Obi-Wan said, from a certain point of view, and just getting into the weeds on what hope really means and how it can be interpreted. And so it made me think about it, like, oh gosh, like, was there a missed opportunity? And what I came up with was, as you were saying, Leia is the Hope Queen. Well, who was A New Hope? It was Luke and Leia. I mean, when you think about it, they were the embodiment of hope. And Luke never really got his one-liner. if you will, for the idea of hope. And so what I would have done, if they would have asked me,
Mhm.
is maybe sneak it into Return of the Jedi right before he throws down his saber and say, hope isn't what I feel, it's what I choose. I am a Jedi like my
Mm.
father before me. Kind
Mic
of
drop.
thing. Mic drop, like literally. And that would have just really, that could have brought it back full circle. So we need another special edition of Return of the Jedi now, basically.
I'll accept that as a script update. I like that. Yeah, and yeah, that actually just made the I don't know if you'll be able to see this in the video, but that made like the hair on my arms stand up when you did that. So
I
yeah,
love that. Yay.
yeah, that's very cool.
Mission accomplished.
All right. So getting away from the themes for a little bit, one of the things I wanted to ask you about this, and one of the things I just enjoyed about reading this book was there is such nostalgia hit. Since you go through these movies in the order that they came out, you made that decision as opposed to doing them in episode order, and along the way you put these inserts, I think you call them in the hyperspace lane, and then I can't remember what the other version was, but regardless, you do inject your experience along the way with what you had for these movies. And I could not help but, especially when Return of the Jedi being taken back to third grade when I saw that movie in the theaters. I know you made mention that you didn't really remember seeing the first couple movies in the theaters and stuff like that. I do, as a matter of fact. A New Hope was the first movie I ever saw in a theater, and saw it multiple times with my family in theaters and the drive-in and stuff like that. I remember not being able to get through the first viewing of The Empire Strikes Back because I was too scared when they got to Luke had fought Vader. And it was not till the second time that I saw that movie that I actually made it through. But Return of the Jedi, I know we were talking about this last week on the Force Awakens episode, that, going to Target and being there in the aisle with all the toys and stuff like that, and then having that nostalgia like that. Okay, so I've said all that. But one of the things I enjoyed is along the way with the conversation of hope was just how much I was reliving my experience seeing the movies as they came out. Did you have something like that happen for you? Because I was like, I don't know how he's doing it, but he's very much evoking those memories for me about going to see these movies for the first time along the way.
It feels like it's in my skin, basically. I think at some level, and I do have the. Oh, can I answer that one? Wow, I don't know if I can. Okay, well, we'll see. Don't remember Star Wars or Empire viewings, but do you remember Return of the Jedi and doing that? And then, yeah, I think I can tell you mostly where the first viewings were for every other Star Wars movie. And yeah, it is just formative is the word that I ended up leaning on, basically. Like it seems like there's some sort of evolutionary marker for every Star Wars movie that came out. I mean, I was one of the people who went to see Meet Joe Black in the theaters in the holidays of 1998. So I could see the Phantom Menace trailer on the big screen, I mean, yeah. And it does mark elements of my life. It was the first, that was the first Star Wars movie, Phantom Menace was, that I saw with my wife. Who was not my wife at that time. Attack of the Clones was the first movie that I saw as a Star Wars movie while I was married. And also that was the first movie that my older son, Joe, technically experienced because my wife was pregnant when we saw Attack of the Clones. Revenge of the Sith was the first Star Wars movie I saw here in New Hampshire for the first time. Like all of these I think particularly with the prequels, actually, they really did mark major moments in my life, in how my life, changed. So it's I don't know if I can say the same necessarily about the 5 movies that came out under the Disney auspices, and that's nothing against them. That's just what's been going on in my life and what was happening at those times. But yeah, the prequels, I think, sat with me, very hard because of the fact that I was really making that transition from, adulthood to, no, this is real adulthood, basically.
No, I love that at least for some of those movies, you have those memories of being with your wife and stuff I got engaged on the night that the special edition of A New Hope came out in theaters,
Ah.
and it was not my plan to get that engaged that night. But there's a longer story. I had a ring, and there's a longer story that we don't have time for here.
Oh.
So it was
You plan to see the movie, but not to get engaged. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I planned on getting engaged at some point, and we planned on seeing the movie, but then they ended up happening on the same night. And yeah, okay, it's a long story, but regardless, and then but with The Force Awakens, that was the first brand new Star Wars movie I took my boys to see.
Mhm.
I was a dad for most of a year, but when Revenge of the Sith came out, so I do.
Mhm.
The point is that I do love, and this was not the intent of the question, but it's just that you do have these, life, these eras of your life that you do remember around these movies happening. And
Mhm.
that's what happened for me when reading your book, was just being able to tie into some of the experiences that you related with growing up and what Star Wars meant to you and the like, and being able to go back to those periods of time in my life and relate to them.
Yeah,
And
and
I
that's
did
one of
that
the
as well. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mm.
tell me about yours, Jay.
Oh, my experiences seeing the movies?
Yeah, like, what
Oh
is it
gosh.
like, when
Yeah.
like, what are those milestones hit for you?
Oh yeah, and again, just like Dennis was saying, I said to myself as I was reading your anecdotes and things, oh, I was doing this or I was doing that. So
Mhm.
just like Dennis, A New Hope was the first movie I ever saw in the theater.
Mm.
Hook, line, and sinker right away.
Mhm.
And what's funny is I don't remember as much because I was like 7 at the time when A New Hope came out, then just Star Wars, of course. And then when The Empire Strikes Back came out, I remember not being as impressed. Like I just remember all of the snow. And
Mhm.
I didn't like snow. And so that really kind of bothered me. And so, but for Return of the Jedi, I was 13, 12 or 13 when it came out. I was 13 because it would have been 83 that summer.
Mhm.
And that was my first movie that I was excited about. And that was the first movie that I ever saw repeatedly in the movie theater. So much so
Mm.
that I had a friend who we actually met at our own kindergarten orientation when we were getting
Mhm.
ready to go into kindergarten. We're still
Yeah.
friends today. And
Mhm.
I remember that summer, I would just drag her to the movie theaters. She didn't really want to see it again. She hated Jabba the Hutt. And every time, here she was with her eyes, closed the whole time. And
Yep.
I'm like, let's go see this movie again. So that was so much fun. And then Phantom Menace, I was actually pregnant with my first son, who he's now
Uh,
just recently made me a grandma. And um,
Congratulations.
thank you. And so I took my niece and my nephew, and unfortunately, that was a very bittersweet experience because my nephew has since passed away from neuroblastoma cancer. He was very
Oh,
young at the
goodness.
time. So
Oh,
we're talking,
wow.
yeah, he would have been 34 now at this point. But at any rate, so
Mm.
it's very bittersweet. Never got to see Attack of
Yeah.
the Clones in the movie theater.
Mm.
I caught it on HBO a few years later whenever it came out on HBO. And then Revenge of the Sith was our first date night for hubby and I after the kids kind of
Uh,
got a little bit older. And
nice.
then I was at a completely different point in my life when the sequels came out. So I actually got to see The Force Awakens with some friends of mine at we were just talking about this, the then midnight, not midnight premiere that was at like 10 p.m. kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
And so it kind of sort of evolved from there. So yeah, it was just so much fun, as Dennis said, to relive all of those moments and just think to myself, gosh, where was I at this point? And wow, it's such a sense of community to know
Mhm.
that we were all experiencing the same things at the same time, but in our own way. And I think that's just it's such a beautiful thing. It truly is. So
Yeah.
yeah, as we were sitting here thinking about it too, uh, gosh, there's another question that I had that I wanted to bounce off of that. But did you guys have anything else that you wanted to add to that before we move on?
I'll just say that, I was just listening to a conversation between Conan O'Brien and Lisa Kudrow, and about how like Friends, the sitcom, was sort of like almost the last water coolery kind of thing where like
Mhm.
everybody was talking about, the same thing, that was part of like one cohesive national conversation. And maybe we don't have that anymore, but we have this sort of longitudinal one with Star Wars, where it has gone on for so long that it has the opportunity to connect so many people at so many different places on the timeline. And so it almost functions the same way, just not in the
Mhm.
same like hyper concentrated thing like, the sitcoms of the 80s and 90s used to do for us. Like instead, it builds, like you said, Jay, like this community, but it has done it over this incredible span of time where there is now like a common language among people who are steeped in it. And it doesn't matter whether you're OT, PT, or ST, like you're part of this broader community. And I know there are people who get very persnickety about which they like and which they don't like, and that's fine. I'm very much a person who's like, love what you want to love. And if, it's not the same thing I love, then I'm happy you love it. So I think we all have this opportunity now to enjoy this in a way that it's like what that water cooler situation was. It's just kind of
Mhm.
evolved over the years.
It's true. And I think Dennis and I have talked about this as well, that The Mandalorian was really kind of the first project in a long time that really evoked that water cooler kind of talk
Mm,
experience because it was episodic and it was something that every week we all looked forward to. And it really brought the community back together. And so that actually reminds me of the question that I was going to ask you,
uh-huh.
in that, now that you've been so hyper focused on hyperspacing hope, for your book, and were looking at all of the movies, is there any content, Star Wars content beyond the movies, that now that you're watching it, that you've really keyed in on those ideas of hope? So be that, one of the series like The Mandalorian, or one of the animated series, or in a character that
Small
you
Shadow
feel
Lord.
that really love how you put that in there, Dennis, that really epitomizes these themes of hope in any way, shape, or form. Or maybe the anti-hero, Darth Maul, perhaps.
I it was it was tempting, and then this could have just gone on forever and ever and ever to start taking live action and say, all right, well, let's look at 3 seasons of The Mandalorian. Let's look at the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Let's look at Andor, which, I think Obi-Wan and Andor strike me as the big hope related series in terms of live action stuff, because Obi-Wan being out in the desert, like that's a guy who has to keep hope alive for 2 decades and do it with, without any contact with the outside world. And obviously, that's not entirely true. And there have been various stories and books and comics that have expanded on the idea of like, he wasn't just sitting in that cave the whole time. He was also, doing other things too, and that's fine. But like, I think we all think of him mostly as, as that crazy old hermit, old, Ben, who's been off in the Junlin Waste somewhere and who knows what the heck he's been up to. But he had to keep he had to keep his hope together for 2 decades with no idea that anything was going to come of what he was doing in the desert. Like just absolutely the last possible shred of hope. And to have to keep that fire tended for 2 decades is just like absolutely crazy. So to see him have to like come out of retirement and to see him not be at the height of his powers, to realize that, oh, I don't know how to use the force so much anymore. Like so you're seeing that like his hope kind of ebbed and faded, and he actually found it when he found purpose and had to kind of have his hope renewed through the course of helping young Leia in the process. And so I thought that was particularly awesome from a hope perspective. And then Andor, gosh, um, when we talk about moments that just like where you want you know like Jay, when you and I were in at Celebration Anaheim, when the reveal for Han and Chewie coming back for The Force Awakens, and Dennis, when you were in your office and seeing that on video and like getting up and it's just like like that level, the episode of Andor where Cassian is trying to get information about the prison guard rotations inside Narkina 5, and Andy Serkis won't give it to him, and then finally like they're hearing about a whole floor was was killed, and they're not letting anybody out. They're just rotating in between the prison blocks. And Andy Serkis's face, like there is a moment where like he's trying to keep everybody in their calm, and but you see him break, and it is like it is one expression, and I swear to you, like I had the absolute like complete luck to see Andy Serkis like randomly wandering the floor at Star Wars Celebration London in 2023, and I just like blurted out thank you to him, like just it was just completely awkward, like just random guy thank you, and
Oh,
he was very kind and said, "Oh, you're welcome," but he didn't know what I was thanking him for. I was thanking him for that one beautiful, brilliant moment where like you saw him break and realize like how absolutely awful the situation was that they were in. And then at the end of the episode, Cassian saying, "How many guards?" And then him going, "Never more than 12." And I was like, "Stop." That was the huge hope explosion moment for me. Like he gets it. He's going to do something, like he has information that can help everybody get out of this prison. He can, like, we're going to have an actual prison break in the next episode. Like that never more than 12 is like, like, yeah. Answer your question.
Oh, I
Yeah,
love that. Oh, those
yeah.
kind of moments are fantastic. And Andy Serkis, I mean, obviously he's such a great method actor anyways. I mean, he's done so many amazing things just in mocap, and just to see
Mhm.
him bring that into live action
Yes.
is incredible. Yeah.
Mhm.
He speaks so many words just with the smallest of motions, for sure.
Oh yeah. Mhm. Oh yeah.
We got time for one more question, and I've pretty much used up mine. So, Jay, if you want to ask one more before we wrap it up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is one that I've really been wanting to ask you is, what do you hope that your readers take away from Hyperspacing Hope, even if they aren't Star Wars fans? So obviously mostly Star Wars fans are going to be picking this up because,
Yeah.
it's your people. But,
Yeah.
no matter what do you really hope,
Mhm.
unintended, that they take away from this?
So, sort of a twofold thing. I still am very much, so enmeshed in Star Wars that one of my deepest hopes is that I want people to like read this and to actually like then go back and watch the movies. And if something in the book resonates with them, if they watch it and they think to themselves, "Oh, I read something about that in Hyperspacing Hope. Oh, that strikes me differently now that I'm watching it and I've already read Hyperspacing Hope." Like the possibility that I could enhance somebody's experience of the movies in a positive way is something that's like a really, wonderful and awesome idea to me. And so like, I mean, I hoped to have done that and in a lot of the episodes of the podcast in general. But to be able to do that with the book, I think would be, particularly amazing. But additionally, when we were talking about tying back into your own personal experiences and the idea of where was I when I was seeing the movies, or how did I feel with those things, getting into the feeling of how you experience Star Wars and what it actually brought to you in your own life, how it actually made you feel special, powerful, part of a community that actually wanted better things for the world and felt like you had the opportunity to make something better for the world around you. If somebody reads this book and thinks to themselves, yeah, Star Wars actually did give me hope in my life, or I connected with the idea of hope. And it makes me think that there might be a way to be hopeful about the world that I'm in right now, which heaven knows we could use a lot of that. Or to even on the smallest of scales. I talk in the book sometimes about reframing the idea of hope when, things seem just so big and the forces that are at work in the world seem so beyond anybody's control or ability to influence it. How can you reframe hope to the idea of, well, I can't make bombs stop dropping, but I could contribute my time to a local food bank. I could do something something right in the community around me. I can start small. I can build from there. I can have some sort of hopeful impact in my life and the lives of others around me. And if this book inspires anybody to, think that way, or inspires someone who has been thinking that way to take a next step, then I think that would be the most amazing and humbling thing that could happen.
That's fantastic.
You're here.
And,
Yeah.
and I'll say too, I don't know if this was intentional, but for me, one of the things that I also got out of this as sort of a fringe benefit, I guess you could say, is the idea that I was able to empathize a little bit more with certain characters or certain scenes. And, you mentioned Count Dooku, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking at that from a different point of view, as Obi-Wan would say, we always talk about that. But, and just thinking, how can I practice empathy a little bit more in my
Mm-hmm.
life? Hope looks different to everybody. And that just because I interpret it one way doesn't necessarily mean that this person sees it the same way, and their circumstances are different from mine and different from this person's, and, and that type of thing. So it's kind of that ripple effect. So
Yeah.
I hope for
Mhm.
your readers that is something that they were able to latch onto as well, because I did.
Thank you very much. That's awesome.
Of course.
Well, this has been fantastic. I'm very grateful that you could come talk to us about this book. And, I'm very much a person that really likes to get into the lore of Star Wars and stuff like that. But I also, as an English major, did
Mm.
enjoy getting into the theme aspect of this as well. And, like I said, it worked on that level. It worked on the nostalgia level. This is a very fun read. It's worth a couple hours of your time. I encourage everyone to pick this up. I know it's available on Amazon, and you're moving towards getting it into stores, possibly at some point in the future. But Alan, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about this. And again, before you go, please let everyone know where you can be found.
Thank you. So the podcast's website is sw7x7.com, and most socials are sw7x7 except for Twitter and TikTok, which is sw7x7 podcast. And the book is Hyperspacing Hope: What the Star Wars Movies Reveal to Us About the Nature of Hope. It is available on Amazon free now, and hopefully in fine bookstores in person in the near future.
All right. Thank you again. So that'll do it with our discussion with Alan on Hyperspacing Hope, and he just told you where you could find it. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust. And if you did enjoy the show, we'd hope you consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. We're available on pretty much all the podcatchers. We would also be grateful if you could rate and review the show on your podcatcher of choice. And then you can head over to retrozap.com to get the entire back catalog of the shows, all 1,026 of them at this point. And Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody where we can be found on social media?
Absolutely. So we are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And you can also check out all of our Pinterest boards. And we do have 2 YouTube outlets. So we have the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. So you can hit up both of those, like, subscribe, share those out, leave us some comments, and let us know what you thought of this episode or any others. And if you want to drop us a line, something that maybe doesn't fit into the parameters of social media, you can do that at podcaststardust@gmail.com. And if you'd like to refresh your closet, and of course, who wouldn't with Podcast Stardust swag, you've got a TeePublic store right at your disposal. So the link is in the show notes for that. And we do have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of fun products. So check it out.
What do you got going on in cosplay, Jay?
Well, cosplay train keeps just moving along. So over on my Instagram, which is always j.snipscosplay, you can catch me in all the antics that I'm up to, either as Ahsoka or Hera or Sister, my Mandalorian, and even some non-Star Wars things as well. So once again, check that out at j.snipscosplay.
All right, upcoming on the show, and this is a prognostication because we're recording this way in advance, but in theory, on Friday, we should be discussing Maul's episodes 7 and 8, and then on Monday, we should be getting into Star Wars news. So, with that said, thanks for listening to episode 1027 of Podcast Stars, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and until next time, may the Force be